Hi, my name is Ethan Duarte.
I'm Mason.
I'm Kyle.
I'm Kaden.
I'm Julian.
And I'm Ryan. And our product is this carbon dioxide recycler. We were inspired to do this project because of the article our teacher gave us that was called The High Sensitivity for Ethanol Using Carbon Nanospikes and Copper Nanoparticles. There are many advantages to our product, such as reducing fines for companies. Every year, the EPA charges companies 12 cents per metric ton of CO2 emitted. And this really adds up because companies are fined at least $3 million a year for over-emitting CO2 into the air. And since our product reduces these numbers, it can significantly lower these fines and save companies millions a year. But it not only affects companies, it also affects the air. Since CO2 makes up 82% of all greenhouse gases, it can lower the harmful emissions being released into the air. It also affects the oceans because since plants are usually supposed to soak up CO2, but it's not able to do its job correctly because of all the CO2 being emitted on a daily basis, that it can't completely do its job, making the oceans acidic and harmful to all sea life. And in large quantities, it can also be very harmful to humans because overexposure to CO2 can lead to serious respiratory diseases such as bronchitis and even premature death. It is estimated that in 2020 that over 3 million people will die prematurely due to overexposure to CO2.
Now, some companies that are using a carbon recycling technique right now are Audi, the car company, and also Nanovation. Audi, for example, creates a product called Blue Crude using captured carbon and renewable sources of energy such as solar power and wind. On the downside, this product is very energy intensive to create and also is not viable for mass production. And New Venture creates a passive absorption system which they plan to place on light poles and parking lots. And this system is good because it uses only the light energy from the sun. But on the downside, it only absorbs the CO2 in that parking lot and it's not able to absorb it from the cars on the road. Now, our product would be better because it absorbs the CO2 directly from the smokestacks before it's emitted into the atmosphere. And it also, the catalyst is not used up in the reaction, so you can keep using our product again and again, creating various sources of fuel such as methane or ethanol just by changing the nanoparticle use. And the most important reason is that it'll save the companies money on the fines that they would otherwise have to pay.
So our first milestone is to receive a funding of $350,000 with an extra $100,000 of capital to produce units. So that $350,000 will mainly go to hiring scientists from Cornell that are currently researching how to mass produce carbon nanospikes because currently no companies are producing that. And without mass producing carbon nanospikes, our product would be much more expensive and would be harder to produce. Each unit costs about $11,000 and we would like to sell each unit to one unit for $50,000. Each company pays about $3 million in fines a year. And if they, let's say, had 20 smokestacks and they would have to buy 20 units, they could still possibly make profit from from reducing emissions that they are emitting. Next, we would like to build up a positive reputation using social media. Also, we would like to, within a year, establish contracts with 3 separate companies to help our reputation. So the cycle. So fuel is burned, which releases carbon dioxide. That carbon dioxide is captured in a sodium carbonate solution. That solution is then turned into sodium bicarbonate, which is baking soda. A company can use whatever they want with the baking soda. They could save it, sell it to another company, or use the second half of our cycle, which releases the carbon dioxide into a reaction, which with copper nanoparticles and electrolysis creates a high yield of methane, and with copper nanoparticles, electrolysis, and carbon nanospikes creates a high yield of ethanol. And we are now open to questions.
Can you tell us something about how big this device would be and how much throughput it would have? And could one of these actually handle a smokestack in real time?
So we're not sure exactly on the dimensions because we would have to do those calculations, but I'm sure that we could figure out a way to scale it based on the size of the smokestack. That way it could work in conjunction with the smokestack to make the fuel at a proper rate for that smokestack's release of CO2.
So the question I have is related to, so the point is to reduce the carbon dioxide that's being produced and going into the atmosphere. Now, if you look at it from the net point of view, meaning how much carbon dioxide has to go into making the input products, such as the sodium carbonate, you may not have the answer now, but it's just something maybe to keep in mind, is how much energy that goes into making the sodium bicarbonate and other inputs and what have you to deal with that versus how much is removed. Because if it ends up being sort of a net neutral, then it would be a little harder to make the sale. Yeah. And on the energy side, similarly, if the electrolysis, if it takes a significant amount of energy in the electrolysis side for the energy, that tends to be energy intensive to produce the fuel at the end. It could sort of net out to not as useful. But then again, having liquid fuel is a use. So if you have comments to that, otherwise.
Add to that, about the whole energy input idea, we were actually focusing on companies that like to pair with solar power. So the energy that would be inputted to the system would actually come from solar energy, reducing electric bills and also reducing the actual creation of the energy. So.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
What's protectable here from an intellectual property standpoint? You got standard chemicals here, and process that's pretty well understood. I don't see anything that's protectable unless you have something to say about that.
You say
Patents,
patents,
trade secrets, something like that. This looks pretty familiar, so how do you respond to that?
One thing that I would respond to is like the carbon nanospikes. Currently, I don't know if they're patented, but they're not. They're still in prototype stage, so they're not something that is a product for everybody. And do you want to say something?
Did you do any investigation, Google searching for nanospikes to see who's done what on that subject?
We read an article that we mentioned in the beginning of the presentation by the Center for Nanophase Materials Science. In the article, it states how the carbon nanospikes aren't the commercial product that we would need them to be. So that's something we would. That's why when we need the research and funding for the development of this of the carbon nanospikes and be able to produce those for our product.
So in other words, the part of our company that is protectable would be if we found out a way to make the carbon nanospikes in bulk, because no one else can do that at this point. And how we hook up our system, the way that we design it to work with the individual smokestacks, that could potentially be patentable.
So I'd like to hear a little more about the business proposition. I think the scientists here have asked you some very good questions. What is you say you need $350,000 for testing. I see the math, but can someone explain sort of how that all adds up, and in particular, how did you develop your business plan?
We came up with $350,000 because we would need a research team, which cost a lot of money to input a lot of people and time to research the nanoparticles, two, the system sizes and a lot of the ratios. We need to calculate the amount of money that we need, so we need a lot of researchers on that. We would also need just basic materials for creating the actual system, so we need a lot to purchase that. We would also need a warehouse and other research spaces, and that here in California, we calculate that it's about $50,000 for rent a year. So that would be quite a lot of our budget going into the rent for our warehouses.
So one thing you may want to consider as you develop all of your great future ideas, you may want to put that in some sort of a summary so that the investor can really look at what your business proposition is.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, judges. Thank you, guys.